Kia ora koutou, and welcome to this virtual presentation about something we've been experimenting with for a few years now, a little thing we've been calling theory of change visuals. First, however, I'd better introduce myself. So, kowaio, no ukarina oko tupuna, I noho rato I runga e te whenua o First Nations me Métis, I raro I te mana o te tariti tu uno, na no whānau Heimlich me Zwarch, ko Michael Heimlich tako ingoa. So my name is Michael Heimlich, and I work at Te Tirewhaka Mātaki, a Māori environmental not-for-profit and home of the Māori Biosecurity Network. I'm the program evaluator there and have been in Aotearoa for 2.5 years, but I come from Treaty 6 territory and homeland of the Métis in Saskatchewan, Canada. So just humor me for a second and close your eyes. Imagine a situation where you put in countless hours of work on a new measurement and evaluation framework, and when it's time to get feedback to present your ideas, you've been met with glazed eyes or 1,000-meter stares. Your optimism now turns to panic, and any excitement in the room appears to be gone. Not so hard to imagine, is it? I've certainly experienced this, and especially early on in my career, it was easy to attribute this to a distinct lack of interest in the minute details of measurement and evaluation. This I totally get. Evaluation isn't always exciting for everyone like it is for us. And I mean, let's be real, even sometimes I get bored with outputs, indicators, and theories. However, I found it can be easy to just push through that disinterest, chalk it up to the sentiment that evaluation is for everyone, and continue. I mean, it's just an occupational hazard for us, right? But then I caught myself. As an evaluator, I was trained to believe that evaluation should be for everyone, that it's in the best interest for organizations to use evaluation in decision-making, that accessibility to our methods, theories, and approaches is the key to their buy-in. I started to think that, by these standards, does that not mean the disinterest we sometimes feel is on us as evaluators? Are our tried and true methods of creating measurement and evaluation frameworks sometimes at odds with the accessibility in their use? And during that time, I attended a workshop by the highly touted data visualization expert Stephanie Evergreen. And on this topic, she said that if the audience feels dumb by your ideas or the presentation, then it's on you, not them. After that, I started to endorse the philosophy that it's up to the evaluator to meet the audience where they're at and take them on an engaging journey that they see as worthwhile. I started to think myself as much as a facilitator as I am an evaluator. And that quote really sparked a change for me in how I saw evaluation. So during the online work environment that was necessitated by the pandemic, where there was a sudden influx of requests to make new measurement and evaluation frameworks, I found it especially vital to find new and innovative ways to communicate with an audience who were facing numerous demands on their attention, like kids at home or surfing Facebook while I was presenting to them. So my goal was to be more responsive to those who I was working with, and through the use of visuals, metaphors, and symbols, I started to call this approach theory of change visuals. Importantly, though, I found it helped us do exactly what people really wanted to do, evaluate in complexity. So when I say theory of change visual, I'm really referring to a diagram, picture, or visualization of a program, or how multiple programs work together and push for change, or even how an organization wants to operate daily, hence the theory of change wording. In the past, I regularly relied on tools like logic models when I was facilitating, but when I found that they were a good way to display multiple parts of a program. But on more than a couple of occasions, I've also seen that they aren't great at raising the heart rate of those sitting in the audience and getting conversations flowing. So without excitement and engagement, facilitation became much harder, and without that, the level of buy-in and amount of quality feedback you get really starts to suffer. However, and probably what grabbed your attention on this slide was the picture, what did grab people's attention and genuinely got them enthusiastic to talk about evaluation was grounding our frameworks and approaches in a metaphor or symbol that had deep meaning to them. So often, visuals were workshopped via document review and multiple targeted conversations and used to portray complex ideas in a hopefully accessible way. I found that they were awesome at helping to appeal to multiple learning styles, as they were often also accompanied by full write-ups and technical details, which some people often like. I also allowed myself freedom and said that there are no hard and fast rules about what this metaphor or symbol needed to be. It can range from something like nature-based, like trees or animals, to human-based, like a beating heart, or something completely abstract. It could be culturally significant, assuming you got permission to use that symbol, or even reflective of the place, space, and land that you're working on, like prairies or mountains. The important thing here, underlying your choice, is that it must be meaningful and engaging to those people you're working with. This means that the metaphor or symbol ideally should be chosen by the people you're working with too. Now at this point, and if you haven't already left this virtual presentation, you're probably already wondering what the hell I'm talking about. So let's go over an example to show you exactly what I mean. So this example I'll show in a second comes from an organization based in Canada. They commissioned us to help revise their evaluation strategy and we propose that we use their values and a metaphor meaningful to them and the land they were on as a backbone to that revised strategy. Importantly to this process, this organization also had a strong desire to decolonize. After reading through many years' worth of materials and thinking about whether they wanted to head as a group, we concluded that all the elements they needed for a good evaluation were actually already there. What they were missing, however, was a way to connect those pieces and communicate the work internally and to the public. And this is where the theory of change visual really made a big difference. So to reflect how their values work together as one and to show their commitment to decolonization, we proposed using an image of the bison in its natural territory, the prairies. This was partly inspired by the reintroduction of bison to the prairies, which continues to be an act and symbol of decolonization. But it's also a symbol for complex ecosystem-style impact and accurately reflected this program's and organizations' aims, intentions, and purposes on the land that they worked on. Having this diagram really helped dispel out assumptions people had about their organization's values and identify what they wanted to measure. It also shows the ways in which they could do that. So, for example, revitalization and sustaining through responsibilities as a funder, respect in people for place, accessibility, and equity of programming. Finally, it gave them a systematic way to understand their intended impacts and how they influence one another. So seeing this, it's important to note that this process does take time to get right, but it also forms a foundation for the rest of your work. The trust and relationships that lead to meaningful engagement evaluation processes is done through this process. And I found it usually takes several conversations and drafts of the visual to get it right. But the bonus to doing this is that it gets people talking, thinking, and excited about evaluation. Which does bring me back to my original point. The facilitation skills are the key to unlocking the potential to this approach. So one of the reasons I wanted to give this presentation is to show you that this tool is accessible. I have found that there are 4 main factors that need to be in place for this to be effective, fun, and engaging. None of these are terribly surprising, but the first 2 things you need on your side is time and patience. It can be hard for some to directly talk about programs or organizations in a more abstract, metaphorical way, and your job as a facilitator of this approach is to ensure that everyone can be included in it. To do this, you should have a great deal of time built into the process, and along with that, patience to help bring everyone along and wait for that metaphor or symbol to reveal itself. There's also a likelihood that those you're working with have not seen evaluation done this way. Some in the room will be immediately excited and on board, whereas some will need to see the process and be convinced of its usefulness, which ultimately helps them contribute to it. Either way, it takes time, patience, and perhaps most importantly, a willingness to be creative. After all, you're trying to create a visual that shows how a metaphor or symbol meaningfully represents the program or organization, all while trying to demonstrate complexity within it. But above all, this approach requires the evaluator to adopt a certain lens. In my experience, it's natural for individuals to have varied perspectives on how they view a program, initiative, or organization. However, it's also likely that they have similar long-term goals or impacts that they want to achieve, despite different ways of getting there or maybe approaching it. When this is the case, it'll mean that those long-term aspirations are taken for granted and even spoken about casually or even cryptically. All this means that it's your job as a facilitator to adopt a detective-like lens and search for clues about what symbols, words, values, and even metaphors people are using to talk about the program or organization. Concretely, you will also need a platform you can use to draw and test your ideas. Now, there are many available, but I'd recommend the platform like Canva. At this stage, I haven't mentioned artistic skill as a requirement of this process, and that's largely because I really lack this skill, and I rely on online platforms to help draw something that looks good. Canva has saved me because it's relatively affordable and has pre-built assets that can be modified to suit your purposes. Another really necessary piece to making one of these is accessing existing data or gathering novel data to help you form parts of a story. Data is defined pretty broadly here, but using the lens we spoke about earlier essentially means having something to read or inform you of how people are talking or thinking about the program or organization. In the past, we've relied on document reviews, semi-structured interviews, and surveys to gather some type of information, but it really can come from anywhere. The underlying point here is that it's important to engage often and get your hands dirty in the human side of the program or organization. The more conversations, active listening, and questions you ask, the easier it'll be to pick up on clues that you're looking for and make that visual. To specify this a little bit more, I wanted to mention the benefits of using values as a starting point to forming the parts of your theory of change visuals. So during the data gathering stages, when having conversations about what this visual could look like, you may find yourself lost or overwhelmed with possibility. While this is exciting to some, I recognize it might be off-putting for others. Therefore, I suggest narrowing that lens and looking specifically for the values that are being used to talk about, implement, and report on the program or organization, and noting here that this does have some theoretical backing and principled focused evaluation by Michael Quinn Patton. I found that by narrowing By focusing on exploring and naming values, the facilitator can better frame and ground the metaphor or symbol. So this whare nui metaphor on this slide is an example of how I've used values in the past to map on different parts of the metaphor to tell a story. Each are unique, placed in a very specific place for a reason, based on their description and purpose within the program, and contribute to an overall narrative. Now that you've had the right state of mind, the tools, and have gathered all the necessary data, the real fun starts. It's time to choose what you're going to visualize. Overall, the metaphor or symbol should reflect the characteristics or qualities of the program or group. Ask yourself what the program is designed to do, how is it being implemented, and use that as a starting point. For example, if the characteristics of a program that is meant to be adaptable, flexible, and to be able to change quickly, then perhaps something small and light might be a good choice, such as a hummingbird. If the program or organization offers long-term sustainable funding to participants, then a well-established large tree might be a good choice, for example. This can really help you with a second factor, helping to tell a story. The right metaphor should help you show you how the parts fit together into an overall narrative and work together to push for change. Another tip is when choosing a metaphor or symbol, is to try and root it in local context. So basically, trying to say that the same symbol can mean different things across the world, or even different things across communities. In our experience, the metaphor or symbol chosen for the theory of change visual needs to be tailored or tied to the environment in which the program or organization operates. And finally, that last key factor is to consider the field in which the program or organization is based. If you're working with an environmental organization, it might make more sense to choose a nature-based metaphor or symbol, like a plant or an animal. But if you're working with a program that focuses on building and providing affordable housing, then perhaps a whare nui or a whare metaphor might make more sense. Now, these are obvious, but our point here is that the more you can establish a place and space for the visual, the more relatable it will be to those who are going to be using it. So to better demonstrate these and the values that I mentioned a little earlier, here's another theory of change visual that we recently created. So this was for a group of community and government organizations within the Predator-Free 2050 movement. They were termed the collaborative groups, and these organizations were brought together by the Department of Conservation under a collective impact model. So individual members have a wide range of unique and varied expertise, and we needed a way to speak and measure across groups. We needed a common language, and to get that, we needed some starting data. So we started with conversations, a documents review, and a short online survey to gather data around what we needed to get some ideas of what the visual could be. So we asked first what values should guide the collaborative group process in an online survey, and this is what came through in that question. So really what this gave us was some ideas of what the parts or the values could be in our visual. So words like collaborate, share, trust, respect, innovation, integrity, participate, kaite, kitanga, and so on and so forth. We also asked what symbols people immediately thought of when they heard the words Predator-Free 2050, and this is what emerged. So in all the data combined, we found that the groups pride themselves on being community-based, agile, and able to adapt to changing circumstances. They also saw themselves as having a bird's eye view of the conservation system, as well as an ability to act when they thought it was necessary. So this gave us ideas for what symbol or metaphor we could use. And I mean, it really hits you in the face in this slide, because it was pretty clear that the theory of change visual needed to be a bird. But it couldn't just be any bird. It needed to be the right bird. It needed to have the characteristics such as agility, speed, intelligence, and one that is native to Aotearoa. Assessing our options, the clear choice was the kariaria, or the New Zealand falcon. This bird is one of Aotearoa's top natural predators, is endemic, and is one of the fastest birds known on this land, reaching about 220 kilometers per hour if you're interested in that. But it's also extremely agile, adaptable, and maneuverable. It's known to take a really high flight, scan its surroundings, and make decisions on which prey to pursue. In other words, it gets a definitive bird's eye view and uses that information to act. So these factors made it a near-perfect metaphor to describe the values and work of the collaborative groups. It represented what they stood for, how they do the work, and most importantly, why they do the work. So working with collaborative group members, we mapped on the values they chose to different parts of the kariaria. For example, responsibility was placed on each wing because that's what propelled the groups and the bird forward. But connection and nurture were placed on the flight feathers to demonstrate the responsibility could only work if they were lifted and supported by the values of connection between groups and the desire to nurture environment and people around them. The story continued on like this for every single value, and it all worked together, but what it allowed for was us to have effective conversations about what the group wanted to achieve, as well as how and why they wanted to. This visual gave us what we needed to create a good measurement framework, and importantly, communicate to group members about it. This group had struggled to get an evaluation framework in the past, and this really helped us finally get an in on that. So you might be wondering, what are the steps I could make one of these and run this process with somebody you may be working with? The first step, which we've already talked about, is to gather the data necessary to understand your context. It's important to reiterate that this because it forms a foundation of your visual. Use any research skills you have and apply that detective lens to your interpretation of how people are thinking about, talking about, and implementing a program. The second step is to pick the right metaphor or symbol and create it. I've also already explained this, but I also recommend adding some minimal text to the diagram to help the readers understand why certain parts are mapped onto the picture where they are. Readers should have all the necessary detail to get the big picture in a single page. Step 3 is using the right method to present your visual. So picking the right method of presenting is crucial, and I can make or break this process. It will look and feel different each time, but I found success in both using YouTube and PowerPoint, noting here that Canva also has a competent presentation system. Regardless of the platform you choose, it's important to present your visual one part at a time. So you'll notice what I mean in this example. The visual on the left has all the parts displayed, but in our experience, we found that doing this sometimes can be overwhelming and ultimately inhibit effective storytelling because people are looking at everything all at once. Rather, what we recommend doing is having each part of the visual pop up one by one. Using that to present helps you bring the audience on a journey. So picking one part of the metaphor per slide as an example. It also gives you an opportunity to talk about each part individually to emphasize its importance while placing it within an overall narrative, just like the GIF is trying to do on the right. 2 different pictures, 2 different ways of presenting, and the one on the right is much recommended. The goal here is to get people excited about evaluation and buying into the process. And the second goal here is to obtain as much feedback as possible so you can ensure that you pick the most effective metaphor or symbol. The fourth step is to refine your visual and metaphor. And again, this is an expected and positive part of the process. The more feedback you receive, the more engaged your audience is. And finally, step 5 is using that visual as a basis for the rest of your evaluation. The theory of change visual should do exactly as it is named to provide an overview of the theory of change. It can help give you guidance on what methods, outputs, indicators, and outcomes you should include in an overall measurement framework, especially if you use values as your parts. So concretely, you can also use those parts or the values of your visual to build out a full measurement framework. Now I'm breaking my cardinal rule and presenting this all at once for the sake of time, but the Coles Notes version of this is that you can use the parts of your visuals or your values to form what you mean and connect them to long, intermediate, and short-term goals and your methods, outputs, and indicators. So basically, as you head down the left-hand side of the diagram, as you get more detailed, basically going from the top down, you're going to get you're going from a value to a specific indicator to measure it. You're also going to better describe what you mean by the parts of the visual, and as you move back up on the right-hand side to higher levels of detail, or going from indicator to method to outcome to value, you will show how you know whether or not progress is being made on that value. So connect that all with the theory of change visual, and you have an interconnected narrative that helps you with reporting, communicating, and interpreting results. You can also incorporate these values into other methods of communications, as I did with this logic map using the values in the Carrera example from earlier. The values appear on both the left and the right, but the outcomes in a traditional logic map are placed in the middle. So there are many good times to use this process, but there are also times when it's not so good to use. It's been pretty awesome to use when the program you're evaluating is complicated or complex, when you have lots of people or organizations involved, and when you have time built into the process. When you have the license to be creative, or in my case, you're an internal evaluator who can implement this over as much time as you need. However, I've also found that it doesn't work in every single case. As with all approaches, there should be a tool in your toolbox, and I found it doesn't work well when it's a straightforward or simple program, and I would argue that's pretty rare nowadays, or if you have a small budget and limited time, which is more common. Trying to do a theory of change visual in these situations might not be the most productive use of everyone's time. That said, it looks like there are many more situations that this process is useful compared to when it is not. So guided by metaphors, symbols, rooted in values, experiences, and language of those we work with, the theory of change visual approach can help create and facilitate dialogue and reflection necessary for effective evaluations. Ultimately, theory of change visuals are more than just pictures. They're powerful tools for getting on the same page, decision-making, and importantly for us, facilitating a meaningful and relevant evaluation. After all, like I said earlier, it's on us as evaluators if an audience feels dumb when reading our materials or hearing us talk. Let's use every tool available to make the evaluation accessible, exciting, and innovative. and ensure we bring people alongside with us on this path towards evidence-informed decision making. Lastly, I would encourage you to embrace facilitation and evaluation and tell cool stories. So that was a pretty quick introduction to a bigger concept. So if you have any questions about this presentation, please email me at michael@ttw.nz, and I'd be very happy to chat further. Thank you.